It's been 4 years since Michael Myers killed my daughter. He vanished without a trace.
What are you gonna do when Michael comes back for you? Because he is coming.
Maybe the only way he can die is if I die too. It's your last Halloween, Michael.
Halloween ends.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kulturecast. I'm your host, Chris Stachiw, and man, it has been, it's been a year. It's been quite a year since the last Halloween, since Halloween of 2024. Halloween of 2024 found me not here in Lincoln. It found me back in Texas due to some circumstances more or less outside of my control. I was taking care of my parents' dog last year while they were overseas, and then my life that was already falling apart continued to fall apart even further. And Alan Sachs, who I worked on the Peter and the Acid King project with, he passed away. My dog got sick. I got into a car accident, all about the span of about a month, the month of October last year. So this year's October could do nothing but be less awful than that. And I don't know if it was. I think that this year's Halloween was kind of awful in a different way. As I mentioned on the last solo episode that I did, my dog passed away in the last couple weeks. And on the Tron episode, I talked about that kind of idea of an end of an era, or the moment when we can look back on something and say, from this point forward, things were, markedly different, or from this point, up until this point, things were different, and then things were different afterwards. So, I mean, things are always different after a certain point in your life. If you actually sit and are kind of introspective about it, you can often find a kind of multiple inflection points in life. And, again, loss, moving, marriage, divorce, those kinds of things tend to be kind of at the top of the list of things for, traumatic things that we have to deal with, grief-driven things that we have to deal with. And the last year for me has been a lot of grief, been a lot of trauma, been a lot of overwhelming emotions that are hard to deal with on their own. And, I go to therapy once a week, which I think is immensely helpful. If anyone listening to this show is struggling with mental health, I would definitely go out and seek professional help. Go and speak with your primary care physician or provider about kind of what you're dealing with mentally, and get them to give you a referral to a healthcare professional, a mental health care professional, and start your mental health care journey. I'm not sponsored by BetterHelp or any of those other kind of questionable mental health apps. I went to my doctor. My doctor told me to go and get psychiatrically evaluated. I went and did that, and then I went and talked to a therapist after the fact. After I figured out what was going on with me, I went and took care of it. And again, I don't know, this is just my mental headspace on how to handle things. But taking care of your grief and trauma and mental problems when they happen, and quicker, sooner rather than later, will allow you to actually, handle the things that are overwhelming you in a healthy and positive way. And boy, Corey Cunningham in Halloween Ends is the best example I've seen in a very long time of a character who does not allow himself to heal from the trauma and grief that has been not really his fault, given what happens at the beginning of Halloween Ends, which I think is one of the more kind of interesting openings of a horror movie in the last decade, possibly ever even. But the character of Corey Cunningham is such an interesting character in cinema because he is a character that has been included in a horror franchise that did not need a new villain, that did not need a secondary, villain being introduced in the 13th hour, essentially, to supplant Michael fucking Myers, who is a character that so many people have a lot of really strong affinity and ties for. Me personally, I love Halloween. I watch it every year on Halloween, and I watch it at least one or two other times during the year. I actually, David Gordon Green's trilogy, say what you will about it, it was immensely financially successful, which I think is not necessarily an indicator of quality, but, in these kinds of cases, one could make the case that that is the case. And at least to the people that are making the decisions to further create films or lay out the money to the people to make the films, yeah. I mean, this movie kind of bothered a lot of people more than any other movies in the Halloween Gordon Green kind of trilogy did. And it's because of the Corey Cunningham character. It's because the character was introduced that is I wouldn't say even a loner. I mean, he's just like a nerd who bad things have happened to him. And he, instead of taking care of his mental health and doing something about it in a healthy way, has decided to further turn inward, further isolate himself. His home life isn't good as it is anyways. He's picked on by people in the town. The entire town has ostracized him because of the accident that happened, which, I mean, obviously was not his fault. But the opening of Halloween Ends, I think, is one of the more horrifying things we've ever seen in cinema in terms of like the stakes of what is happening and then the like, oh my God, misunderstanding. So Halloween Ends is a movie that, like I've mentioned, kind of ruffled people's feathers in a way because the focus of the movie is in a lot of ways similar to Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. David Gordon Green even wanted to have Halloween Season of the Witch, the Shamrock Mask Factory. He wanted to have that in this movie. He actually wanted to include that in this film, which I think is rather telling of the movie as a whole. That the point of the movie was actually going to be to further kind of pay homage to the film in the franchise that has aged better than most of the films that came after it. Halloween 3, I think, is a movie that on its own, obviously, as a film outside of the Halloween franchise, I think it's an immensely successful film. Now, I understand why, when it came out initially, it was received so kind of poorly. I mean, look, people wanted to see more Michael Myers, but the original Halloween movie was meant to be an anthology horror series. It was never meant to be the story of Michael Myers and the continuing adventures of Laurie Strode. It was always supposed to be about an anthology story of Halloween Night, telling the story of Halloween Night, not necessarily telling the story of one character and her interactions with another singular character. Look, nothing wrong with it. I mean, if you're successful, if the movie is successful, you'd be kind of hard pressed to not go, okay, well, I understand why we're making another 5 Michael Myers movies, but Halloween 3 kind of was not, at the time, what anyone was expecting. It was a complete and utter departure from the Halloween franchise. It was not Michael Myers. It was not Laurie Strode. They're not even mentioned in the third movie. It wasn't John Carpenter either, though you could make the case that the second movie was John Carpenter, and that didn't seem to help. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Halloween 2. Halloween 2, I think, in a lot of ways, like, is the reason they made these Halloween movies is to counteract Halloween 2 more so than H2O or any of those movies. But it's not surprising that Halloween Ends is what it is, given that David Gordon Green is a student of cinema. He is a student of franchises. He understands and appreciates the importance of film franchises, and he pays homage, but he also is irreverent with the way he treats the source material, and that's, in my mind, something I'm here for. We've talked a lot about over the years, being subversive or subverting audiences' expectations, and to use the famous pop culture example of the last 10 years, The Last Jedi is a movie that subverted everyone's expectations in a way that, really upset a lot of people. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I liked Last Jedi when it came out. I actually haven't seen it since it came out. I don't remember enjoying it at the time. I remember thinking that the movie had its problems and that I wasn't a big fan of it, but the people that really didn't resonate with it felt like it took the franchise as we know it and didn't honor the roots of the franchise and was kind of looking at the franchise as an opportunity to do something very different. And, well, why would you do that if you have a franchise that has all these rules and expectations? It's like, well, some people are interested in paying lip service to the original series. Some people are interested in kowtowing to the expectations of the original series. And some people are interested in just doing their own thing. And they've always wanted to do this thing in this world. And, could they have written a script for a movie that isn't Halloween, that has a character like Corey Cunningham at the beginning, or has the Shamrock Mask Factory? Sure. But would it have gotten people through the doors as easily? No. And that is the reality. This is a business. It's called show business. It's not called show, as I've said with so many people in the industry before. It's not called show. It's called the show business industry, because there's a money component here. To speak to the Tron Ares of it all, boy, there's a money component to Tron Ares, and it didn't make any money. Why didn't it make any money? Well, it's not because it didn't give the audience what they wanted. There was just no audience there to watch the movie. I don't know who they made Tron Ares for. That movie, the original film came out in 1982. The sequel came out in 2011 or 12. And then the most recent film came out in 2025. Anyone who watched the original Tron in theaters is in their 40s or 50s at this point. Well, that's even 60s. They're not going to see Tron Ares in mass. And the people that would be going to see it, I don't think they're interested in the Tron franchise, because it's just, I just don't think that I don't think it has the legs that it used to with the audience now, because people's tastes have changed. However, when Halloween Ends came out, it was well received financially, but critically, and as kind of the fans of the horror franchise would let you know, the fans of the franchise did not like him. The fans of the franchise were pretty disappointed. They didn't like the Corey Cunningham character. They were, again, not interested in the lack of Michael Myers. It was some of the similar kind of critiques of The Dark Knight Rises, where it's like, where's Batman? Batman's in this movie for 5 minutes. And it's like, yeah, that's very fair. In Halloween Ends, Michael Myers is in the movie 15 minutes, maybe? If it's even that, the movie's 111 minutes, so it's almost 2 hours long. I would say Michael Myers is in the film less than a half an hour, but it's less about him specifically and more what he represents. And that's, to come back to the kind of, this is a very different Halloween story of it all. This is the story of Michael Myers' influence and legacy on the town after that Halloween night that took place, in the first movie, in the 2019 Halloween night. Because the beginning of the movie is set in the year of the original release of the new Halloween franchise. And so, everything is taking place over one night in this series, in these 3 films. So this film opens with a flashback to the night of Halloween, where Corey Cunningham accidentally kills the kid that he's babysitting by kicking the door and causing him to fall off of the stairwell and plummet like 3 stories down to his death. Obviously Corey gets arrested. Corey is cleared of manslaughter, but the entire town knows that he killed someone. Whether or not it was intentional doesn't seem to change the fact that the entire town has ostracized him. And that is a literalism of what people who are suffering from trauma and guilt and grief struggle from, is feeling othered by the thing that you're suffering from. Obviously, the movie, because it's a film and because Haddonfield is a kind of town that has been, and again, Laurie talks about it in her narration throughout the film, or her monologue that is kind of throughout the film. She talks about how the town of Haddonfield has kind of been infected by the sickness that is Michael Myers, by the overwhelming evil that is Michael Myers, and that evil has kind of permeated the town. And, the opening of the film, the title crawl, we have pumpkins within pumpkins within pumpkins sprouting out of each other. And I think that's very telling and indicative of what this story is getting at, which is, around, even though small towns are, very welcoming and kind, I live in Nebraska. Nebraska nice is a phrase. Nebraska nice being people aren't actually nice to your face. They're nice, they're nice to your face, but they're not actually nice to you. Behind your back, they're actually just, being assholes. And that's where the term Nebraska nice comes from. And Haddonfield's in Illinois. So, we're not in the world of Scream, where it's California. We're in the Midwest. And I think what's funny is David Gordon Green actually gets to the Midwesternness of Haddonfield in this movie, where we have, the local the local theater punks, the band kid punks acting like assholes when they're normally the ones being marginalized. They're going after someone who, is the most marginalized and ostracized of everyone in the town. Because, he's viewed as a murderer and a fuck up and, kind of a monster. And, people pick on him because, he's like the town drunk, essentially. At the beginning of the movie, he's talking about how he has all these plans. He's going to go away to engineering school. And then once everything happens, and again, it's not his fault what happens. Like, this is not what's interesting is, unlike Halloween, this is not a Michael Myers is evil and he's always been evil. And again, they even make the case in this movie that, maybe Michael Myers isn't evil and maybe Laurie Strode is just, antagonizing someone who's mentally unwell. Because, again, someone who's mentally well does not kill their sister with a knife. And so, they make the case possibly in this movie like, well, is Michael Myers actually evil, or is Laurie Strode just the one who antagonized him? I don't think that the movie's making the case that Michael Myers isn't antagonistic and that the people of Haddonfield are the problem. I think it's just more asking an interesting question. It's kind of opening up the horizon of just to ask that question, not necessarily make the statement that that's the case. And I say all of this because the Corey Cunningham character represents the idea of, instead of, evil being from within, evil can be fomented externally, and the kind of overwhelming nature of what you're dealing with without any sort of support at home or any support of your own. Because again, that's the other thing. The Corey Cunningham character has no support at home whatsoever. That evil is, it's the nature versus nurture. Michael Myers is just evil, seemingly just evil. Corey Cunningham, if not for the fact that he accidentally killed a young child on Halloween night who was fucking with him, mind you. The kid was fucking with him, not the other way around. Corey Cunningham would have just gone on and lived a normal life. He might have gone away to college and never had any issue. Would he have met Laurie Strode's granddaughter, Allison? No. But to be fair, if he hadn't met her, a lot of the other awful things in this movie would not have happened as well. But Corey Cunningham, if not for the fact that something bad happened to him, he would have gone and lived a normal life and been perfectly fine. It's the way that he reacted to what happened that is the point of this movie. And the point of this movie really is make sure that if bad things happen, if you're in a situation where trauma and grief are ruling your life and you feel overwhelmed by it, that you have a healthy outlet for your emotions. You have a healthy outlet for your feelings. You have a healthy outlet for what's going on. It doesn't seem like Corey ever went and spoke with a therapist. It doesn't seem like Corey ever went and spoke with anybody about what happened. I'm not even sure that the people in the town really know what happened. And look, like anything else, everybody in the town could not be against him. There would be some people in the town that would be sympathetic to him. There would be people in the town sympathetic to him because he seems like a nice person at the end of the day. Seems like a bit of a dolt. At the beginning of the film, we have the parents of the young child being like, well, hopefully he's better at babysitting than he has at yard work. And it's like, well, shit, man. Why are you this kid is being piled on even at the beginning of the movie. And so, and then you look at the way his family treats him. You look at the way his mother treats him. You look at the way his stepdad treats him. And you're just like, I understand now why someone who was already at risk has now further given into the evil, further kind of turned their face towards the evil of the situation and made it apparent that, he's embraced the evil, but he was not always evil. He was teetering on the edge of evil. He came from a broken home. He came from a home where his mother was abusive and his mother was, I would say sexually abusive almost, but in a lot of ways, what his mother was doing was very overwhelming. She's a helicopter parent, maybe, but her there's a weird level of physical intimacy that she has and kind of ownership of the intimacy that she has over her son that would lead me to believe that there was some sort of abuse going on at some point. But it's less about telling us specifically what's happening, but giving us an idea that this guy's home life is just as unstable as the rest of the world. And maybe, the world wasn't as unstable as it is now, but the fact that it is as unstable as it is now is contributing to this character's already overwhelming mental situation. The situation being he killed someone. There's no support system there. There's no one there to kind of reassure him that things are okay, reassure him that he's not a monster. And, that's where we kind of see the Laurie Strode character come in to the equation. And so the thing that's interesting about the Laurie Strode character is Laurie in this movie is better. Laurie is unlike her version of the character in the first two films where she's living out in the woods by herself and running away from things. She is embracing the grief and the trauma and saying, fucking bring it on. Like, let's go. Like, I want so badly for you to test me, tempt me, do what, grief and trauma, do what you can to push me down, do what you can to make me not feel like I am in control here, but I am going to push back and tell you unequivocally, no, I am in control. I am not going to let it derail me. I am not going to let it overwhelm my life and control my life. That's why she moves into a house at the beginning of this movie. That's why she's working on her memoir. That's why her character, I think, if anything, and this is the thing that I find really interesting, I didn't see a lot of anger directed toward the Laurie Strode character, even though in this movie, she's being written very differently from the last two movies. And I find that rather funny because I feel like this is the way people wanted Laurie Strode to be written, as someone who is just like, you know what? I'm not going to let this affect me. I'm not going to let this ruin my life. I'm not going to let this control my life. I am going to live. I am going to acknowledge that bad things happen. Bad things can happen, but bad things don't necessarily always happen, but they can happen. And, that's why in that first Halloween movie, we have Laurie literally, out in the woods, isolated in this cabin. And it's like, man, what a bummer for the character of Laurie Strode. But at the same time, it's like, if this is the story that you want to tell, this is a logical direction to go, that she's, so concerned with the return of Michael Myers that she's going to isolate herself from everyone else so that no one else has Michael Myers drawn into their web because he, again, per her belief system, is attracted to Laurie Strode. I mean, again, this franchise, these three movies make the case that Laurie Strode isn't really special in any way to Michael Myers. They more or less make the case here that evil comes from everywhere and that evil is ever present. And, it's how and in this movie, it's how we react to the evil and the trauma that defines us, not the evil and the trauma that's inflicted on us. Like, evil and trauma and grief don't define us. But with the Corey Cunningham character, it more or less has defined him throughout the entire run of the film. I mean, every time he interacts with anybody in public, they make a point to talk about, that's Corey Cunningham. Didn't you hear what happened to him? Or that's Corey Cunningham. What a freak. Like, everybody in town knows. I mean, even Laurie knows. Laurie sees him the night everything happens. Like, Laurie knows that, the town is treating this kid poorly, which is why Laurie goes out of her way to, However, all of that does not change what we get as the movie, because as it is a Halloween film, and as it is not going to just be a bunch of people enjoying their time on Halloween 5 years later and just reminiscing about Michael Myers because, hey, we haven't seen him since 2019. This is a Halloween movie written by David Gordon Green and friends. So we are going to get the literal return of Michael Myers, but also the sort of metaphorical transference of evil, or again, this franchise finally addressing the idea of, is Michael Myers evil or is he possessed by something evil? Does he have agency of his own, or is there something else? And this movie makes the case that there might be something else. There's a scene in the film where Corey Cunningham, after being kind of further antagonized by the band kids, the last kids you would ever think to be bullies, he's thrown kind of underneath an overpass and he crawls into he's dragged into a sewer drain, and he interacts with Michael Myers, who looks him in the eyes and kind of can see into his soul in a way. And in seeing into his soul, he realizes that, there's a ability and a possibility for evil, and an ability and a possibility for Corey to, to be evil. I mean, it's never explained. They don't really do anything with it in terms of Michael and Corey. We get Laurie kind of talking about to Corey kind of like, what she can interpret as his abilities, what she's interpreting as he's doing, what his kind of agency in the situation is. But what I really like about the Laurie Corey interactions in this movie are, it is the Dr. Melfi, Tony Soprano of the film. It is the kind of emotional core of the film, is Laurie trying to prevent Corey from going down that road of Michael Myers, of, becoming the other, being othered by your society and your neighborhood and your community, to the point where the only course of recourse that you have is to lash out and attempt to kind of secure your place in the community. And Laurie sees that with Corey. I mean, she can see that Corey is clearly at risk. He's the kind of person who has a lot of agency of his own, but his agency is constantly being interrupted by the external world and how he's being treated by other people. He's letting the way he's being treated by other people overwhelm what he knows he should be doing. I mean, again, he had a lot of aspirational goals. He had a lot of aspirations before the murder at the beginning of the film happened. And then, we pick back up 3 years later, and he's given up life completely. He's working in a junkyard. He's not doing much with his life. He's being antagonized by the marching band kids. But, he has taken a downturn in life that is, again, partially his fault and partially not. He didn't take it very well. He didn't react to it very well. Clearly, we don't see that. That's the part of the movie that we don't see. We don't see the accountability that is lost on Corey Cunningham's part. We don't see the accountability that's lost when it comes to him going, well, yes, this happened. No, it's not my fault. Yes, it was an accident, but I'm not going to let the townspeople continue to bully me and ostracize me. I have to further stick up for myself. And it's not clear to me that Corey Cunningham at any point in the film actually sticks up for himself. It's not other than when he starts killing people, which obviously is kind of the nuclear option in terms of actually sticking up for yourself. But we don't get the sense that Corey Cunningham at any other point in the film feels comfortable sticking up for himself unless he has, the identity that he's born with taken away by using the Michael Myers mask. I mean, we have a lot of mask wearing in this film. It's very metaphorical, the idea of wearing a mask, having a mask. What does that mean to hide one's face, to hide one's identity, to hide or hide behind something, and with someone like Batman, you have something where, the cape and the cowl and the mask are being used as kind of objects of power, because Batman knows that the level of fear that he strikes within people is being exacerbated by dressing up like a bat, by dressing up like Batman. And Corey Cunningham understands similarly that if he dresses up like Michael Myers and goes about murdering people in the town, that the iconography of Michael Myers, the mask that Michael Myers wears, has struck enough fear into people, has struck enough fear into the townspeople, that he can traffic in using that and hide behind that as a way to manage his mental health by using Michael Myers as kind of a mask, both for himself but also for committing crimes, taking it out, getting revenge on the people who treated him like shit and ostracized him in the town. He runs into the mom of the child that he kills at the bar, and, she just won't let it go either. And look, I'm not saying she doesn't have a right to be upset, but she literally goes, "You're a monster, Corey Cunningham. You lost your mind. You killed my son. It's your fault. Innocent people don't kill kids." And it's like, you know what? That's not the case. Evil can be born, but evil can also be fomented, and evil can be, evil can sit and fester for a long time. And 3 years, while it might not seem like a long time, is the amount of time in this film where Corey Cunningham has done nothing about the murder that he committed at the beginning of the movie. Whether or not it was intentional, he still killed. And he hasn't seemingly done anything about it other than wander through life for 3 years and allow the townspeople to continue to pick at him and pick at him and pick at him and pick at him and push and push and push. From the band kids to the kids' parents to the radio DJ who went about ostracizing Corey over and over and over again. And what's interesting is, he brings up the idea that people look at him differently and they see him as a monster, even though he's a survivor of what happened as much as anybody else is. And, he says to Allison, Laurie Strode's daughter-in-law, like, people look at you and they see a survivor. It's not your fault that Michael Myers went after you, but people look at me and they see a monster. And, what happened to us is what happened to both of us is neither of our fault. And it's in that moment where you realize that, like, no, Corey is actually to blame here as much as anything else. He's to blame because he's unwilling and unable to do better. And he doesn't want to actually, like, take Allison's, like, open hands. He's not actually wanting to take her, like, comfort and care. He rejects that. And in rejecting that, he finds himself in a situation where he goes and is further antagonized by the marching band kids. He's then tossed over the bridge, and that's when he interacts with Michael Myers. And that's when, that's the crossing of the Rubicon moment of the movie. It's only about, a half an hour into a 2-hour film, but about a half an hour in, you realize, like, this is the moment where Corey Cunningham could have just gone away with Allison and he could have stayed at the bar and things would have been different and things wouldn't have ended the way that they did. And he wouldn't have gone and murdered, a bunch of townspeople. I mean, again, most of these people that he murdered were deserving of it. I mean, this is kind of a Dexter scenario. Being bullied is obviously not a reason to kill someone, but the marching band bullies are pretty nasty. I mean, yes, they're like high school kids, but they're just unrepentant in how much of assholes they are. And so the film kind of codes it as, well, they're getting what's coming to them. And for the most part, a lot of the people in the town, by Corey's approximation, are getting what's coming to them. I mean, that's kind of the point of what's going on is, they're getting what's coming to them because, they ostracized and antagonized Corey and, how terrible and how awful for them to do that. And it is terrible. I mean, the way that they treat Corey is terrible. The way that they make him feel like a monster and they ostracize him is terrible. But at the same time, he's not handling it in a healthy way. He should have just left. He should have never stayed in Haddonfield. And if he hadn't stayed in Haddonfield, none of this would have happened. If he hadn't stayed in Haddonfield, he might have gone somewhere where nobody knew him because, yes, while people do have things follow them from town to town or state to state, there are also plenty of people that, they leave where they are and they go somewhere else and nobody knows them. And that's that. And Corey could have done that. Corey should have done that. Corey didn't do that. And in not doing that, we then have a character who's been pushed to the limit of his mental capacity because he cannot and will not and is unable to look at the situation as anything other than the world is out to get him. And look, the world isn't not out to get him. It's been shown very clearly that the community is very vocal with him about the things that have happened and the things that he's done. Is that realistic? I mean, in this day and age, you could, extrapolate, interpolate onto other scenarios, people feeling like they are justified and validated in their bad behavior. And so their bad behavior has existed in that form kind of passively, but now they've been given the opportunity to outwardly embrace their worst vices. And I think, the last Halloween film, Halloween Kills, the entire hospital kind of interlude of the film really spoke to the mob mentality of Haddonfield, which is, even a good town of good people can be turned into monsters by, the notion or the idea of bad things going on or people, doing bad things in the town. And I like that in Halloween Kills, we see the mob mentality we see that infection moment of the town where the town starts to become evil and lose its mind. The Stephen King story, one of the aspects of that kind of story is that Derry, the town itself, is evil, and Derry is kind of been infected by the presence and the evil of Pennywise. And I think that, David Gordon Green cops from it in this movie in that respect. Like, Haddonfield has been infected by the evil of Michael Myers. He's, subterranean even. I mean, he's underground in this film, which is ironic given the kind of Pennywise being underground of it all. But Michael Myers is in the sewers of this movie. He's underground. He has been waiting for 3 years underground to, again, we're not even sure because he could have made his presence known in 3 years. I think he's been waiting, again, per the narrative, narrative's belief, he's been waiting 3 years for Corey Cunningham to come down here. He's been waiting 3 years for someone to find him. I mean, there's clearly the homeless man who finds him, but, Corey Cunningham wandering into the drainage ditch is the inciting incident of this film that then everything else plays out from. It's the reason Michael Myers comes out of the sewer, because Corey goes back to get the mask. It's the reason that Laurie and Michael meet one final time, because Corey interacts with Michael and essentially reawakens the beast, as it were. And I like that aspect of the movie. It doesn't bother me that Michael Myers isn't in the film that much. And I'll tell you why. I don't think in a lot of ways that the horror films of old, the slasher films of old, and the way things were done are really interesting in 2025. I think it's more interesting to do something fun and new and creative with your characters. And I think sidelining Michael Myers as kind of the evil that he is, and the evil of the town, and the evil of evil incarnate, using that, but having it kind of be like the evil DNA, a little bit of kind of, speaking of John Carpenter, the Prince of Darkness, is the devil real, or is he just like a complex string of amino acids? I mean, this movie asks that question. Is evil real? Is Michael Myers evil, or is evil something that exists within him? Is evil something that he has not been able to control himself either? And so similarly to Corey, he kind of has just embraced it because that's the easy thing to do when confronted with it. I think Michael is actually evil. I think Corey is one of those people that was kind of, he was vulnerable. He was, a very vulnerable person who, because of his vulnerability and his, he's at risk. I mean, he's such an at-risk person, and he was at risk before all the bad things happened. He was at risk before he accidentally killed a kid. I mean, his mom was still treating him that way before everything happened. His home life was still a mess before everything happened. It's just once there's nowhere safe to go, that's when you feel overwhelmed. And that's when you feel like you can't do anything about the situation. And Corey has no course of action. He has no release valve for the tension and the pressure in his life, which is why he should have gone and gotten taken care of mentally, because we wouldn't have this movie if that had happened. But at the same time, because that isn't what happens, we get to see one of the better, I think, kind of, kill compilations or collections of a Halloween movie. We get a junkyard scene that's pretty great. It's got a lot of interesting kills. I think that the intensity that they bring to that scene is great. We got Michael killing people in a lot of interesting ways. I mean, in a lot of not Michael ways. I mean, non-Michael Myers ways, like using cars and motorcycles and other things. I mean, Michael Myers is primarily known as a, butcher's knife killer. I mean, that is his kind of, his weapon of choice. And we get a lot of non-kitchen knife kills. And I really like that about the movie, because we get to see someone else using the Michael Myers mask, someone else using the Michael Myers kind of symbology to create fear in the town and to create fear among the people that were antagonizing him. And, that extends to the visual language of the film. We get a lot of callbacks to the original film with Corey standing at the edge of the bush, and Laurie looks outside and sees him. There's a lot of visual language that's repeated. There's a lot of things that we kind of get from other films. I mean, again, to go back to the Halloween 3 Silver Shamrock of it all, this movie is so Halloween 3 in that it just kind of is interested in doing its own thing, and it doesn't really care about anything else. It doesn't really care about what's come before it, which is interesting given that this film is directed by David Gordon Green, who directed the other two films in this franchise. And he wrote the other two films in this franchise. And it's wild that he's so concerned with telling a different story, one that he knew would be divisive, because the horror bros want Michael Myers. They want more kills. They want more gore. And it's like, look, you got Halloween Kills. Halloween Kills is the most atypical, say what you will about Halloween Ends. Halloween Kills is the black sheep of the Halloween reboot trilogy, and I will tell you why. It is the black sheep because Michael Myers' intensity in that film is exacerbated intentionally so that we can see Michael Myers ripping people apart and being horrifying in a way that he never was before. And he's pushed at the end of the first movie to go and exact vengeance and revenge on the town that has wronged him. And he goes about it in the most bombastic, gory, and over-the-top way. I mean, that fight with the firefighters at the beginning of Halloween Kills is pretty intense. And by fight, I mean him murdering all the firefighters and them not standing a chance. That is atypical of Halloween. That's not, like, Halloween is a very slow burn franchise. The original movie, most of the film is just Michael stalking people, and then we get Laurie and Michael at the end of the movie sort of fighting each other, but more Laurie just running away from Michael and trying to protect herself. So, Halloween as a franchise is not known for people being eviscerated on screen left and right. That's never been the intention of Halloween. But Halloween Kills because the horror tastes have changed, because things like Terrifier exist, because things like Saw and Hostel exist. The creators of Halloween knew that the people who were going to come see this movie, there would be a subsection of the audience of the people that would come see this movie that want to see a gory, brutal Michael Myers murdering people and tearing them apart with his butcher knife film. And it's not that we don't need that. It's just that should be viewed as atypical. This movie is a typical Halloween movie. It's a very slow burn film. It's a very methodical film. Michael, or Corey as Michael, goes around kind of killing people very slowly, very methodically, very intentionally. Halloween Kills, I mean, it's a brutal film of Michael just roaming the town, murdering people. And look, nothing wrong with it, but it is the atypical Halloween movie of this trilogy. The trilogy really, like, the third movie, I think, is more in line with the first movie than the second one does with either. And I think, again, that just goes back to the intention of the filmmaker in the second movie was so different than in the third. And I think that's what's interesting about David Gordon Green for me, is that David Gordon Green is not necessarily compelled to do what the audience wants him to do. He's not necessarily compelled to do what he thinks is the expectation. He tends to just do whatever he wants. He tends to do whatever he thinks is going to push the story in an interesting direction. And him and Danny McBride and Paul Brad Logan and Chris Bermier, like, they have all done a fantastic job with this script in creating a movie that speaks to the themes and the ideas of the Halloween franchise, but they tell it in a way where Halloween feels secondary to the story. Halloween, the franchise, feels secondary to the story. And I think for a lot of people, the third act of the movie is kind of where the real rubber meets the road in terms of, like, well, now we've gone a step too far. And look, I can't blame this movie's advertising campaign for trying to convince you that it was going to be the fight of the century between Laurie and Michael. If that's what you thought, that's because the trailers of this movie sold it that way. And that was not being done in good faith. That was being done, as advertising for films tends to be, not being done with the best intentions. It was being done because they wanted people to come through the door, and they knew what people were going to see. But they knew that there was going to be a group of people who would be swayed by saying, oh, this is the last time that Michael and Laurie will ever fight each other. So this is going to be an event. I got to go see the last time Michael Myers, is on screen. First off, this is not the last time Michael Myers is ever going to be on screen. If any of us know anything about the horror world of horror filmmaking, it's that you cannot keep a good franchise down. It might seem like it, but even something like Friday the 13th is getting reappraisal and readjustment with the Angry Orchard collaboration of it all, which is so fucking insane and so wild and so bizarre in and of itself. But Halloween as a franchise is a notable and one with notoriety. So of course the advertising for the film was going to be Michael and Laurie taking it to one another. That is literally 5 minutes of a 2-hour movie, like 10 minutes tops. Like the Michael of it all, the Michael Myers of it all specifically, is not part of the main plot. It's kind of the wraparound, as it were, to use a horror anthology parlance. Like, it is the wraparound of the story. We get to see the Michael Myers story come to a conclusion. I almost said satisfying here, but I think that that's me subjectively saying that. I think objectively, a lot of the people that are bigger fans of Halloween than I am were disappointed, and I understand why. I if I'm going to go see a Michael Myers movie, I kind of want Michael Myers to be in it, but I also, as someone who watches a lot of movies and can get out of my own way, understand that, I am in the filmmaker's hands. I am in the director's hands here. Like, the director is making a film for him ultimately, or her. And if I resonate with that film, cool. If I don't resonate with that film, cool. The intention of the filmmaker was to make a film for them or for what he perceives or she perceives to be the audience. And that's what David Gordon Green did with all the Halloween movies. It just happens to be that the first two movies resonated more with the audience that it was expected to resonate with than the last one. But I can't help but wonder, like, did David Gordon Green not think, well, if I don't put Michael Myers in my movie a lot, people might be disappointed? I wonder if he was like, well, I put him in my movie a lot in the first two. The first movie was very much like a love letter to Michael Myers in a lot of ways. Like, we get, the movie, he's the focus of that movie. And so I sit here and I wonder to myself, like, did we need yet another retread of the first two movies? I don't think so. I actually think that Halloween Ends does some really interesting, fun, and unique things with a tired franchise. And I'm not going to say tired as in the first two movies in the requel trilogy were tired, but if the third movie in this requel trilogy had just been like those first two movies, I think myself and a lot of other people would have said, well, this is all we're doing. Like, I don't know what people wanted from this third movie. I guess people wanted an hour and a half of Michael and Laurie fighting, but Jamie Lee Curtis is a woman in her, in her 60s, going on 70s. Like, I don't know what physical back and forth you were expecting from Michael and Laurie. Like, this movie shows us a short, intense, close combat battle between the two of them, where they sit and fight in Laurie's kitchen, and Laurie, she gets the upper hand, but not really. And then by the time that, she is, has the upper hand, Michael also gets the upper hand. And so, like, I was convinced this movie was going to end with the two of them just kind of flying off of a cliff together, or, getting decapitated at the same time, or any number of things that would cause them to both die at the same time. And we don't get that, but the movie baits us into that right towards the end. The movie shows us, like, well, that could have been the case in a different movie. In this movie, we have Allison come and save Laurie in those waning moments of the fight as Laurie's being choked out by Michael. And I think it works. I think it works that then Michael is dragged to an industrial grinder. He is then fed into said industrial grinder, and we watch as Michael Myers, the shape, is ground apart, and we watch it happen. So there's not any of this, like, well, we didn't see it happen, so maybe he's not dead. Like, no. In this movie, there's none of that. In this movie, it's we watch him die, and that's it. We don't cut away. We don't look elsewhere. We don't attempt to have our gaze averted. We are here to watch the town and their procession of people affected by Michael Myers drag his body, because he's already dead, mind you. Like, he has been killed already. Laurie and Allison killed him by slashing his neck and wrists, which you cannot survive. I mean, regardless of whether or not, this is a Halloween franchise, regardless of whether or not Michael has survived all kinds of other things, this franchise has made it clear that he's not going to survive that. And so he's dead by the time they drag him to the industrial grinder at the end of the movie. But that's not really the point. The point is to put to bed Michael Myers as a character, and put to bed the Michael Myers kind of legacy, and put to bed what Michael Myers is all about. And I think this movie does a good job at putting the Michael Myers of it all to bed. Look, we'll probably get more Michael Myers. We'll probably get more of him as a character. I hope not. I don't need any more. This is a good ending to the franchise. This is a worthwhile way to put the Michael Myers character to bed. I wish Corey Cunningham had survived. I wish they had kind of made the decision that they seemingly thought about making to allow his character to survive, to have him be the Michael Myers of the franchise, to have him be the Michael Myers of the series. But I mean, also, Rohan Campbell, I guess, was not ever going to be that. I mean, it's interesting. They kind of float the idea of the transference of evil, and they float the idea that he could be the next Michael Myers, and that, his journey to becoming Michael or evil is very different from Michael's, but it's still a journey that he's gone on, and it's still a journey that he has been part of. And I was super interested in that character and seeing where that character went with things, and where the franchise went with that character, who is so different from Michael, who has different agency than Michael, who has different motivations and means and intents than Michael. And I I really wish that they had not bailed on the Corey Cunningham character. I wish they had not bailed on Corey as the focus of the franchise, because he's an interesting character, and Michael Myers looms large in the movie, but Michael Myers didn't have to be the continued focus of the franchise. We could have moved away from it, and in this movie, it almost feels like they ripcorded out at the last second. They parachuted out at the last second, and it bums me out. It really does, because for me, I wanted the franchise to end, and it did. But I also thought, well, if they could continue the franchise in a substantive way, and they could use a chance to kind of get themselves out of this while also ending things, like, why not, right? Like, it's unrealistic to expect that this franchise is not going to continue. And we don't get that. Corey Cunningham dies at his own hand, and then he gets his head smushed by Michael. And I liked the idea of it looking like he was going to kill himself and frame it on Laurie. I like that idea. I wish that had been further kind of discussed and maybe talked about, and it wasn't, and it really wasn't. And I'm disappointed, because that's another kind of avenue that we could have gone down. But, the idea of Laurie being framed for his murder and him kind of going off to do murdery things. I mean, yeah, that's not Halloween, but I mean, again, if you listen to the response to this movie, most people didn't think that this movie was much Halloween to begin with. So, and that's my issue with this movie is, you go into it expecting Halloween and it's not Halloween, but right at the end of the movie, it remembers, oh yeah, no, this is a Halloween movie. And I kind of wish it had just not done that. I kind of wish that, yes, Michael needed to die. I agree with that sentiment. Like, that needed to be over and done with. But for me, like, I could have really used some other thing to keep this going. I could have really used a furtherance of the Corey Cunningham story. And I think the issue that I have with this movie, as much as I like this movie, is this should have been two separate movies. The Corey Cunningham stuff gets in such the way of this movie, and it's so good that everything else that the movie is doing with the Halloween Michael Myers of it all doesn't live up to how good the Corey Cunningham stuff is. It almost feels like they're hamstrung by having to have Michael Myers still be in this, as opposed to just doing their own story. And I'm really disappointed by that, because for my money, I would rather have a movie where the main character and the other characters, maybe there's a legacy sequel aspect to it, but that's not going to get in the way of the climax of the movie that I'm watching. The legacy stuff should be integrated into it in an interesting way, but it shouldn't supersede the things that are happening. Look at Ghostbusters Afterlife. Oh, there come the Ghostbusters at the end of the movie, completely robbing our characters of any agency that they might have had in terms of stopping Zool in that movie. And in this movie, it's like Michael Myers ends up overriding all the interesting Corey Cunningham, Allison Strode, Laurie Strode kind of interaction that the movie has spent an hour and a half doing. And at the end, it's like, but we know you're here for Michael, so we're going to still do the Michael thing, and we're just going to do the most obvious Michael thing. And that for me is kind of like, that's the missed opportunity with this movie, is that this movie had to have Michael Myers in it, and it had to concern itself with ending that. And while, yes, I think it ended it in an interesting way, I don't think it did it as interesting as it could have. I think it kind of second-guessed itself in terms of what it thought the audience was going to want, what it thought the audience was going to need. It knew that the audience probably wasn't going to vibe with the Corey Cunningham story, but they did it anyways. But then they pulled back at the last second. And in pulling back at the last second, it's like, well, why did we spend all this time? Commit to the bit or don't. Commit to the bit or don't. And in my mind, this movie commits to the bit 90% of the way. But it's that 10% that matters, because it's the 10% that sticks out like a 90% sore thumb when you don't do it. And that's the problem with this movie. The end of this movie sticks out like a sore thumb for the rest of the movie, because the end of this movie is the ending of a movie that we weren't really watching. It's the ending of a movie that it thought it was showing us. But the movie that it's been showing us is the story of how evil foments, how evil becomes, how evil takes hold, not how evil has already taken hold. Because in the original Halloween, evil's already taken hold. In this movie, this is about how if we don't support each other, if we don't look after each other, if we're not caring and compassionate and kind to each other and try to understand the human experience best we can, we will ostracize people. We will push people away. We will cause people to turn to violence, because that is the only option that they feel like they have. And I actually think the message of Halloween ends is a lot more important and prescient than the Halloween Kills, evil dies tonight mob mentality. I think Halloween Ends is one of the few films that I've seen where it makes the case that mental health is important. We should not turn people away that are struggling. We should not ostracize people that are struggling. We should not make people that are already vulnerable and susceptible. We should not further cause them harm and push them to do things like stabbing people in the neck with corkscrews, like murdering men and women, like taking a man's face and slamming it into a turntable so hard that his jaw distends. None of that could have happened if Haddonfield itself had not been evil. And that's the interesting thing about this franchise is now the evil is not so much the people in the town as much as the town itself, and kind of the holistic nature of all of the evil in the town. It's kind of hard to find any one person in the town that isn't terrible, other than like the people that were directly involved with Michael's evil. Everybody else is just going out of their way to be antagonistic. I mean, we have the doctor and the nurse who are antagonizing Allison. We have all the band kids. We have all kinds of people in this movie that are antagonistic towards Laurie and Allison and Corey. And, you know, I think for me, in a lot of ways, the story in this movie works better than it's worked in any of the other ones, which is the town is evil. Bad things, when they happen, tend to have a life of their own, and they tend to live on long past when they've happened. And this movie is indicator of that. Michael is an old, decrepit man, but he can still kill people. Evil is, even when evil is old and gray, evil is still evil. Evil in any form is evil, and Corey is evil. Laurie, you know, she acknowledges his evil. The town is evil. The town's been infected by the evil. But Allison and Laurie have rejected the evil. They've rejected the darkness. And that, for me, is what I love about this franchise, is that at the end, even though the movie kind of flails around in the third act, I like the conclusion of Halloween Ends, with Laurie and Will Patton seemingly getting together, Michael seemingly dead, Laurie being given a seemingly happy ending, and the movie echoing the final shot of the original film with, you know, Michael's mask sitting there, and, you know, we're going to close on that. And we're going to have, there's not going to be any breathing this time. There's just going to be the mask. And there's no question as to whether or not Michael is alive. Michael is dead and gone. And I'm glad. Kill the past. Let it die. You know, I'm not one for revisiting the past, because I think getting lost in the past is a real fool's errand, because the only thing that we can do is change the future and change our current situation, and how we react to the things that we deal with is what's important. The things that have happened to us, they've happened. It's past tense. Can't do anything about it now. And that's what Corey doesn't understand, is he's the only one who can move on. He's the only one who can move past things. If other people haven't moved past it, that's on them. But he allows those things to get to him. He starts to internalize those things. And by the end of the movie, there's nothing left. He has lost his identity completely and embraced Michael Myers to the point where Michael kills him because he is stealing Michael's shtick, as it were. And I find Halloween Ends to be an immensely interesting film. I find it to be a compelling film, and one that I didn't know I needed, but one that now that I have it, I kind of can't help but like really enjoy it every time I watch it. I've gone on record multiple times saying the opening of the movie is hilarious in a lot of ways, and it was such a shocking moment that it kind of reminds me of the opening of Scream in a way. It's like you just didn't see that coming. And, you know, Scream obviously with Drew Barrymore, like everybody knows Drew Barrymore is going to die at the beginning of the movie, other than the people who saw the movie in theaters. Like, you could still go into this movie not knowing what's going to happen in the first 10 minutes, and it is impactful and it is wild. And again, like it's a moment of violence that's accidental, unlike a moment of violence at the beginning of Halloween that is intentional. But yet the outcome is still the same. The outcome is still death and violence. And that's because our way of handling it is the underlying issue. The lack of attention, the lack of care, the lack of compassion in this society creates monsters and foments monsters. And Halloween Ends, I think, is turning a mirror on society and saying, look, we create monsters by not being empathetic and not being compassionate towards people, even people we don't agree with, even people we don't like, because people are people. And It's the lack of compassion in the world that causes people to feel like they have no other course of action but to turn to violence. When people are not compassionate and that is seen as a constant, I think Halloween Ends is definitely worth revisiting. I think Halloween Ends is a film worth checking out. I think Halloween Ends is and has aged better than the movies that surround it in the franchise, and I for one am a huge champion of this film, and I think that if you haven't seen it, I would definitely check it out. And it should yield dividends in that regard, because for me, I always want something weird from my franchises, and this is pretty weird. This is definitely out there. So if you're on the fence about it, definitely check it out. Maybe don't announce that there's going to be a trilogy of movies ahead of time so that the movies are completely robbed of their stakes. But hey, I don't make movies for a living. I just talk about them. So like, rate, and review this show on iTunes and Spotify or wherever you get it, please. Patreon.com/Kulturecast, Patreon.com/Projection Booth, and Patreon.com/Father Malone are 3 places you can go to interact with the people that I work with or the shows that I work on. And yeah, happy Halloween. Stay safe, stay weird. Don't do anything I wouldn't do, that's a pretty wide margin. And we'll catch you on the next episode of the Kulturecast.